or what? I'm sorry.
I teach in university.
University.
And yeah, I am from Nepal.
You are from Nepal. Oh, okay. Very
Yes.
good. Very
Yeah,
good.
from
Welcome.
Kathmandu, Nepal.
Kathmandu, Nepal. So very good.
Yeah.
Welcome to our program. I have friends at Kathmandu who used to teach at the university. Now they are in New York.
Okay, thank you, sir. Actually, I teach statistics and medical school.
Hello.
Okay. Hello.
Hi.
Nandana. Hi.
Hi. Namaskar.
Namaskar.
Hello. Namaste.
Namaste. I need to log off and log on again because the screen is very dark. I can't see you for some reason.
For me or
the screen. The screen. It's a problem with the screen. So I'm just going to log off and come back on. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Fine.
Any more light?
No, I think it's just something in the settings. I just need.
Oh, that's you. We mixed up with somebody else. So we were thinking, who'd that be? Diwali, you are still on, right?
Yes, I am.
Okay, very good. Nandana has joined, as you have heard her, and some other attendees have joined as well. So আমরা এখনই হয়তো আর কিছুক্ষণের মধ্যেই we will actually move into the live session. People have started joining actually. Nabaneeta Ghosh, Kishore. Kishore, is that you?
Yes, sir.
Okay, you are Kishore. Okay, very good.
Yes.
So, Nandana, you're good now?
Yeah, I think so. It's
okay, very good. We can see you clearly, very clearly. So we are good as long as you can see us.
Yeah.
And wanted to also, give you an update. Yes, it's being recorded at Ananda Mandir's, server. Also, as a backup, I'm recording it on my computer as well. So if there is a problem, I think one of the two would be available for use. All right. I think people have started joining. We have 5 more minutes and we will start very soon. Bear with us.
Nandana.
Namaste, Nandana ma'am.
Hi, namaste.
Yeah,
Namaste.
I am from Nepal, Kathmandu.
Oh, how lovely to meet you. I'm just trying to log on to my phone so that my husband can see it from another room. So if you go to our bedroom and put that on, it should work. How lovely to meet you. We're very, very excited. Diwali.
Hello.
Hi.
Hello.
I'm so glad that you got the page numbers and all of that. I think that will be really helpful because but we have that as a reference.
So Kishore, it must be very early in the morning for you.
Yeah, it's early. It's 4:45.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Okay. Die hard.
So I sorry, I didn't understand that when you said you're from Nepal, I thought, like I'm from Kolkata, but I'm not in Kolkata right now. You're actually in Nepal right now?
Yeah, I'm in Kathmandu, Nepal.
Well, I am so delighted. I'm really touched that you're joining us, even though it's in the middle of the night.
It's too early in the morning.
It is too early in the morning, absolutely. But that's so I'm really touched. Thank you so much. So how did we decide we would do this? You would moderate the Q&A then, Shubhrata, right?
Yeah.
Yes, yes. Devali and I had a chance to compare notes.
Mm-hmm.
So I will basically scan the questions and present to you two the questions, and
Right.
for the rest of it, of course, Devali needs access to the chat room to post the information,
Right.
and that's already done because you are the co-host, and outside of that, I think it's like business as usual. Say, Ami Ekorbo. First of all, say a few words about the format, about what we do at Alochana sessions,
Okay. Lovely.
and then, of course, introduce.
Yes, and to answer your question, please, however you want to do it, because it's totally
No, that's fine. Either way is fine. So, and introduce you and Diwali, and then, of course, you two take over. And তারপরে আমরা এ করব. It's about time. We have 2 more minutes or 1 more minute. So people have started joining.
That's great.
Yeah, we have quite a few attendees.
How many people are we expecting? Do we have any idea?
I'm expecting at least 50 people, at least, if not more.
I think Diwali we've both kind of spread the word in our.
Yeah.
So hopefully. Now, Diwali, do you recognize some books behind me?
Yes, I do.
There...
My book. Thank you.
So, the book, there's a wonderful translation Diwali did of Shunil Gangopadhyay's Rokto, which is behind me, if you can see. In fact, I think Acrobat is being hidden. I should put that also next to it.
I can see that, and Diwali and I were discussing that translations, and she's in the midst of translating some of your mother's work as well. So,
Yes.
Nandana, you are actually sitting right in front of the book. So why don't you?
What did when I had this? When I had said before, it was fine, right?
এইভাবে ঠিক আছে, হ্যাঁ.
Beautiful. ঠিক আছে, আমরা 7টা বাজে আমরা অফিশিয়ালি এখন প্রোগ্রামটা আরম্ভ করতে যাচ্ছি. So I would unmute the participants. Anyway, we will start right now. Hello, welcome to the latest episode of Shahitya o Alochana, or simply Alochana. I am Shubhrata Bhaumik, a co-chair of the group. The other co-chair, Amitabh Bakshi, is in the audience. I think he's somewhere in the audience. I think he has joined. In this session, we are going to discuss Nabaneeta Devshen's life and works with a special focus on Acrobat, the recently published collection of some of her poems translated by her daughter, Nandana Devshen. And including Nandana, we have 2 cultural and literary icons in our midst to enlighten us on the topic. At the outset, let me take a little time to lay out the flow of the program. The discussion will be in the format of in conversation with the main speaker, and there is going to be an interlocutor. In the beginning, I would like to say also a few words about our Alochana sessions and introduce our guests, Nandana Devshen and Devali Mukherjee Leonard. Once we are done with that segment of the discussion, the main segment of the discussion, there will be a Q&A session where Nandana will directly answer questions from the attendees. Please post your questions in the chat room so that we can review them ahead of the Q&A session for Nandana to answer. Also, I also wanted to lay out the total time we have available so that we are mindful of the time. We have about hour and a half to 2 hours. Hello, one of you have multiple devices on, so please mute one of them. In terms of timing, we have about hour and a half. That is extendable as well, but of the hour and a half, we would like to devote about an hour or a little over to the main segment, which is the discussion segment of the program. And another half hour would be devoted to the Q&A session. But the total time is extendable to 2 hours. So we have between roughly 1.5 to 2 hours. One more housekeeping item, the book Acrobat is available for your purchase at a discounted price. I have a limited stock that you can order from.
Really a romantic evening in the sky. Your husband, Philip Slayton, is also your business manager. Oh, yes, indeed.
Hello, please mute yourself.
Not many men would do that for their Philip is one of a kind.
Well, you're on. So we started the program. Please mute yourselves.
Oh, darling. Thank you. It's so nice that you could join us. Welcome to our home. Thank you.
Hello.
I'm sure there's one thing that our audience is bound to know. Just what's it like to be there?
I have to mute you.
কি না আমি যে এটা খুলেছি
Now you know this is my love story.
So anyway, please mute yourselves. Somebody is speaking and talking, and we have a lot of echo. So, but anyway, one more housekeeping item. I was going to talk about that. The book Acrobat is available.
How am I supposed to answer that?
Hello.
Shubroto, I think you should mute everybody and then you can unmute us when we are ready to speak.
Yes,
yeah?
I thought I did that. If I didn't do that, I will do that. But it's also mute all. Okay. Sorry about that. Sorry about that interruption. It was definitely not intended. So we were talking about the book. That's available for your purchase at a discounted price. I have a limited stock that you can order from, or you can order them directly using the information posted in the chat room for this purpose. Now, I wanted to say a few words about our Alochana sessions. Alochana session is a monthly literary and topical discussion forum under the aegis of Ananda Mandir, a Bengali/South Asian community organization and heritage center in central New Jersey. The Alochana group has completed its 13th anniversary in January 2021 and have organized 125 sessions thus far. These sessions featured exciting and illuminating discussions on eclectic and diverse subjects, including literature, art, theater, movie, history, philosophy and religion, science and mathematics, economics and business, social issues, sports, and current affairs. If you'd like to volunteer to be a discussion leader or just attend one of our sessions, please get in touch with me or Amitav Bakshi, the other co-chair who is in the audience. Most of you have my contact information because you probably are on my distribution list. If you don't have my contact information, I will post it in the chat room so that you have it and you can contact me if you need to. So at this point, I would like to give a short introduction of our main speakers, moving into the next segment of the program. Starting with Nandana Devshen, an award-winning actor, writer, and child rights activist. Nandana Devshen is the author of 6 children's books translated into 15 languages globally. She grew up in India, England, and America, and has starred in 20 feature films from 4 continents and in multiple languages. Nanduna's first book, Kangaroo Kisses, was selected by over 300 UK nurseries as a book of excellence, and her interactive workshops have been loved by more than 30,000 people across the world. After graduating Phi Beta Kappa from Harvard University, where she won the John Harvard Scholarship and Elizabeth Agassiz Prize each year, and studying filmmaking at University of Southern California School of Cinema Television, Nanduna worked as a book editor, a screenwriter, an advocate for child protection, and as Princess Jasmine in Disneyland. The winner of the Last Girl Champion Award, as well as several Best Actress awards, Nandana has served on jury of multiple Child Protection Commissions, global film festivals, and international literary prizes, including the DSC Prize. As an advocate and ambassador, she has worked with UNICEF, National Commission for Protection of Child Rights, Operation Smile, Rahi Foundation, and Apne Aap International to fight against child abuse and to end human trafficking. Nandana Devshen is brand ambassador Child Protection, Save the Children India. She is on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, all 3 at Nandana Devshen. Next, I will introduce our interlocutor, Debali Mukherjee Leonard. Debali is a professor of English at James Madison University, Virginia, where she is also the current chair of the World Literature Program. She graduated at the top of her class from Jadavpur University, India, with a master's degree in comparative literature. Moving to the US, she went on to do another master's from University of Minnesota and completed her PhD at the University of Chicago. Debali is a prolific writer, literary critic, and an accomplished translator, having translated works of some of the stalwarts of Bengali literature, including Sunil Gangopadhyay and Nabaneeta Devshen, which is in process. At Jadavpur University, she was a dear student of Nabaneeta Devshen. With that introduction, without further ado, I would like to invite Nandana and Debali to start the main program.
Thank you, Subrata, for that generous introduction. So I'm going to start right away, Nandana.
Well, it is so lovely to be here with all of you. Thank you, Subrata, for organizing this. It's been a very strange year, and especially it's been such a difficult time in India. And I think any opportunity that we have to feel that we are together is very precious. And Debali, I'm so grateful to you for agreeing to do this. It's you've had a long and quite close relationship with my mother as a student and also now as a translator. And I want to tell you both how delighted I am that you've made time to bring us together for this today. So thank you.
Thank you, Nandana. It's an honor for me to be invited by you to do this. Okay, so Nabaneeta Devshen, or Nabaneeta D, as I addressed her when she was my professor, was a poet as well as the author of novels, short stories, essays, travelogues, children's books, and literary criticism. She was also a gifted painter, but the art form that she most identified with was poetry. The daughter of two distinguished poets, Narendra Dev and Radharani Devi, poetry was her inheritance. She started writing it at age 7 and published her first collection of poems, Prothom Prottoy, or First Confidence, at the age of 21 in 1959. It was in the looking glass of poetry, she wrote, that I saw my face for the first time. Poetry was my first confidence. End of quote. So Nandana, could I ask you to read First Confidence, your translation of the title poem from your mother's volume? From your mother's first volume. It's actually on page 81 of Acrobat.
Thank you so much. Yes, I would love to read that. As you said, that is the title of her first book of poems, Prothom Prottoy, and thank you for inaugurating our session today with that. First Confidence. Rain sweeps through my drapes this monsoon morning as curtains toss. Every door flies open toward the past. The dry leaves melt away, soaking wet. The footprints now lie hidden in moss. I unfold my face into the rain. I wrap my body in drenched hair. Now, lifting my eyes, I stand tall, and in this free and weightless light, I say with confidence, for the first time, I have forgotten all.
That was beautiful. Thank you.
Beautiful poem, yes.
Still focusing on the centrality of poetry to Nabaneeta's work. Could I ask you to please read the poem Jotokal Kobitaye, or in poetry, both in the Bangla version and the Bangla original and your translation?
Thank you so much. I think I would love to read the Bangla. I mean, I think everybody present here, almost everybody probably understands Bangla, but I think the music of her poetry is so distinctive. So, Jotokal Kobitaye. বেঁচে থাকো, ফুটে থাকো, অমোঘ পাসপোর্ট ছবি হয়ে প্রত্যেক লাইনে তুমি জেগে থাকো, আকণ্ঠ তেষ্টার মতো, ছাতি ফাটা যন্ত্রণা আমার, ফুটে থাকো, লুকিয়ে থেকো না, যতকাল কবিতায় বাঁচি. In poetry. Stay alive. Show yourself clearly, like an unfailing passport photo. Stay awake in every line, you, like an unquenchable thirst. Yes, you, the pain that tears my heart apart. Show yourself clearly, like a flower in full bloom. Don't hide from me, as long as I live in poetry.
Very nice.
Thank you. Why do you think, Nandana, that poetry was so central for Nabaneeta Di?
You know, I think you have very beautifully answered that question yourself by also the selection of the poems that you've made. I think these two poems have in them the way toward unlocking that question. I think, as you said, she grew up in a family, in a home that was full of poetry. Both her parents were poets, and poetry was integral to the way my mother saw herself. I think she grew up not only writing poetry all her life. I mean, she had a kobitar khata that she would keep under her pillow until the end. She was scribbling lines in her kobitar khata till the last few weeks of her life. So she really saw poetry as not just as her passion, but also her life partner that she could always rely upon. And so as we see in the poem First Confidence, I think poetry allowed her to understand who she was. I think poetry was, to her, it was the true reflection of her most, of her truest self. So that was part of it. And then the other poem that you asked me to read out in poetry also shows that the very strong connection she had with poetry as a coping mechanism. So she really relied on poetry as a way for her to heal throughout her life. And she wrote about it many times. The fact that she felt that if she did not have poetry as a resource in her life, then her life could have fallen apart. In this context, I should also say that she felt that poetry was a survival tool, not just for herself, but for women. She wrote about that as well extensively. And as you know, she herself was quite devoted to translating women's poetry from all over the world. And part of the reason why she did that is because she felt that poetry was a vital necessity for women's freedom, and also as a way to survive. So, and by that, she didn't mean just women poets, educated and urban poets writing, in their ivory tower. She also wrote about the poets in the villages of India, the women who were working in the fields and singing songs and writing about their experiences through their poetry, through their form of poetry. Also, that poetry for the reader, for the female reader, was also a way of gaining strength. So I think there were lots of very, what should I say, visceral ways in which she connected with poetry. And although, as you know, she was prolific in every genre, and she certainly had many, many, many more books of prose than she had of poetry. Whenever she was asked how she saw herself as a writer, she replied without hesitation that her primary identity was always as that of a poet.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. You have distilled the magic of Nabaneeta's work into exquisite English poems. How long did it take you to prepare this collection, and what determined your selection of poems?
Yeah, well, so this book actually has poems that Ma wrote over 60 years. And some of the poems here were translated as long ago as when I was in college, and Ma came to visit, and actually she came on a lecture tour, and the beginning, in a way, of this book, although we didn't recognize it to be that, was when she was asked by the Bunting Institute at Radcliffe to do a reading of her poetry. And she didn't have poems in English. She had actually written a lot of poetry in English as well in England, but she didn't have them with her. She had her Bangla book of poetry, and we quickly translated some of those so that she could do the reading at the Bunting Institute. So we started translating her poetry together over 30 years ago. But this particular book had its origins actually a couple of weeks before she died. She signed the contract with Archipelago Books, which has an amazingly creative and visionary publisher, who had seen this book of mine, which is a book that I had done for Ma called Make Up Your Mind, based on Ma's book Tumi Monosthir Koro, which is actually right there above your book. Oh no, your book is there. But so she found this book and said, I would love to publish a book of a collection of your mother's poetry translated by you that's more extensive. And so Ma was very excited about it. And Jill then moved heaven and earth to make sure that we had this beautiful cover in place, although we didn't have the book. But so we started, the journey of this book started very much with Ma, and we even made a first list of poems that she wanted to make sure would be included in this, because there were some poems of hers that in translation that were already in circulation. She was very clear about the ones that needed to be in any collection. So we had that list. That wasn't very long. So that's how it all started. We didn't have time to progress on it much more at that time, but then I started working on it in that time after Ma left us, and it took that was what I was working on all of last year. And it was, I think, when I was selecting the poems, I was thinking about which poems. There were a couple of things. The first was, other than the poems that she had already identified, which of course I translated, I also knew which poems she loved to read. I grew up, with going to poetry Kobi Shambelans with her. So I wanted to translate all the ones that I knew that she loved. And then also I wanted to translate poems that would be representative of different times, different eras in her life, because she wrote differently. Her first book, Prothom Protyay, for instance, is very, very different in style and in content from Tumi Monosthir Koro, which was her last book of poetry. So I wanted it to be representative as well.
Mm-hmm.
But there's so much of her poetry that there's so much more that needs to be done, which I hope you will do.
Let's think about that. I'm actually deeply grateful that you chose to translate so many more of her poetry and include them in Acrobat, because when I got my hands on Make Up Your Mind, it has only 25 poems that have been translated. In Bangla, we would call it a choti boi. So there was so few. I had to ration. I promised myself that I would read no more than 2 poems a day, so that when I just had this book, so that I could extend it as long as possible. So thank you very much.
Well, the thing about this book is that also I wanted it to be bilingual. So you have the Bangla and the Ingreji in that. And, Make Up Your Mind is also that's also kind of a choti boi, actually. It's a very thin book, but I was very happy to have been given this opportunity by Jill to have a more comprehensive selection of her poetry. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let us proceed to the poem that lends its name to the collection, Acrobat. Do you please read both the original and the translation?
Yes, I'd love to. I think here it is. Okay. Read the Bangla first. মাদারি ভেবেছে সে বুঝি খুব সুন্দর মাদারি খেলা জানে, দুহাতে সময়কে নিয়ে লোফালুফি, এখন তখন দুটোই নাচাবে দুমুঠোতে, হেঁটে যাবে দড়ির ওপরে, ভেবেছে সে সব কিছু পারে, জীবনে একবারই শুধু দড়ি কেঁপে ওঠে। She thought she knew acrobatics rather well, that she could juggle time with both hands, play with the now right next to the then. She would make both dance, she thought, fist to fist, and she would glide so smooth along the tight rope. She thought she could do absolutely anything at all. Only once in your life will the rope shiver.
Thank you. This poem describes a tightrope act. The image could serve as a metaphor for the act of translation, since the translator also walks a tightrope between faithfulness to the text on the one hand and readability in the new language on the other, where tipping towards either side could be perilous. However, to preserve the feel of the original, you as a translator made certain choices. For instance, in Madari, the gender non-specific third-person Bengali pronoun she is employed, excuse me, which in your translation Acrobat, you have replaced with the English third-person pronoun she. Is this because the English she is close in sound to the Bengali she, or is it because it's in keeping with Nabaneeta Dee's feminist inclinations, or perhaps both?
Well, that's such a lovely question, actually. The answer to that is actually neither, in the sense that, this book, so that is one of the books, one of the poems that's in the Choti Boi, right? And this book I was writing, in fact, on my honeymoon. I was doing the translations on my honeymoon as a birthday surprise for Ma, which meant I couldn't discuss the translations with her, right?
Oh, yes.
So I couldn't ask her. I really wanted to ask her how she wanted me to translate the she. But I didn't want to ruin the surprise. So I made the decision to make it a woman, because I read it as a poem about the multitasking that a woman has to do, that because there are multiple identities that inhabit you as a woman, and womanhood is a constant balancing act. So that's the way I interpreted the poem. And I also, and that's actually the reason why I called it Acrobat rather than Acrobatics, because in Bangla, actually, the title is Madari. But I wanted to locate the poem firmly in the female identity of the character. So that's why I called it Acrobat. But after the book came out, I asked Ma this question. There were a lot of questions about choices that I had made in during translation that I wanted to double check with her, because this was a labor of love. This was for her 75th birthday, so I self-published 75 copies of it and gave it to her for her to distribute. But the book was well loved, so it ended up, then there was another print run, and I wanted to make sure that everything in the print run was as Ma wanted it to be, and not, since it was no longer a surprise. So I asked her that question, and her answer was actually closer to the way you described the possible interpretation of Acrobat, which was that it was more about language. So you said translation is a balancing act. And for Ma, when I asked her, she said, I didn't really think about the gender of the character, because for me, it was about poetry. When you write poetry, one word too many, or one word too long, or one word that has the wrong emphasis or weight can throw you completely off balance. So I was really talking about the delicacy that goes into writing a poem and perfecting a poem. So it was kind of beautiful to hear that. And then I asked her, but she also said, but the way you've translated it and the choices that you've made are perfect. And she didn't want me to actually change that. But that's the story of that poem. Yeah.
Thank you. Nabaneeta Dee spoke often of her fascination with the musicality of words. She notes that although she was christened Nabaneeta by none other than Tagore, the word Nabaneeta during her childhood held no magic, because in her mind it evoked no images, no music. So she once scratched her name off the covers of her school textbooks and notebooks and replaced it with her adopted name, Binapani Biponi Dev. Binapani Biponi, or the Binapani store, was the name of a shop that she passed by daily on her way to school. To her ears, the alliteration and the rhyme in Bina Pani Biponi blended into a melody. She maintained her love for rhyme in her poetry too. So was it a challenge for you to preserve the rhyme when you were translating her work?
Yes, it was. And as you correctly said, she was very moved and she was very moved by and devoted to rhyme as a way of not only creating meaning, but also emphasizing emotions in her poetry, also including revelations in her poetry, sometimes for actually expressing dissent. She used rhyme brilliantly, masterfully in her poetry. And I made promise to myself that any poem that I translated that she had written in rhyme, I would render in rhyme, which is not something that I had actually done in Make Up Your Mind. There were some poems in here that she had written in rhyme, which not many actually, I think 2 that were not, that I hadn't translated in rhyme, which I redid for Acrobat because I wanted to be true to the rhyming structure, as well as the vocabulary, as well as the cultural allusions. So yes, it was a challenge, partly because, I mean, translating poetry is always a challenge, but translating poetry of a poet who was so remarkably talented at rhyming was definitely added to the challenge. But we all, my sister and I, grew up loving rhymes because our family was, it was a poetry filled home. My dimma was very, as you know, you've translated her, in fact you have translated my dimma's poetry in rhyme, retaining her rhyme, so you understand this extremely well. She was also someone who was very attracted to the formal structure of poetry, and my mother inherited that both from my grandmother, and also from my dadu, Narendra Deb, who was a poet and a translator, and someone who taught my mother actually a lot about the form of poetry. Mm-hmm. So that was a challenge, but there is such music in the way she she wrote her poetry. Some of the poems were easier because they had an easier rhyming scheme. Like there's a poem called my daughter is making her presence felt. Hi. There's a poem called Out of Reach, which has it has an AA. She had an AA BBCC rhyming scheme in her original, and the other poems, like, so in all of the cases, I wanted to be true to the rhyming scheme that she had. But there were some poems in which I did that, but that was much harder. Like she has a poem called Ekal Chirokal, which is an iconic poem, and that has an A, B, C, B, C, A, D, D, E, E, A, very complicated rhyming structure. So it was harder with some poems than with others. Mm-hmm. But it was so much fun though, because in our home, we would send each other rhymes when on our birthdays. We didn't make cards. Whenever I was depressed about something, even when I was in college, Ma would make a little funny poem about it and send it to me in the blue aerogram. So we kind of spoke to each other, not literally spoke to each other, but we had a language within our family, which we had a rhyming tradition within our family. So it was a challenge, but a beautiful one. Yeah.
Could I, since you mentioned it, so it gives me a way to ask you about it. Could I please request that you read Ekal Chirokal, both the Bangla original and your beautiful translation?
Of course. Love to. এই কাল চিরকাল আমাকে নেবাতে পারে এত শক্তি রাখে না সময় কখনো ভেবো না আমি সময়ের মুখ চেয়ে থাকি সময় আমার সঙ্গে খেলে যাক যুদ্ধ যুদ্ধ খেলা যতই কারুক শাড়ি লজ্জা বস্ত্র ঠিক থাকে বাকি মন্ত্র বলে বেলা হয়ে যাবে সব যা ছিল অবেলা ধর্মযুদ্ধে প্রতিবাদী চিরকাল দাঁড়ায় নির্ভয় যেহেতু সপক্ষে তার ঈশ্বর সাধিত মহাকাল স্বয়ং সারথি হয়ে সব বুহ ভাঙেন উত্তাল যতই দিক না যুদ্ধ খণ্ডকাল হবে পরাজিত এই তো জেনেছি শাস্ত্রে যতটুকু হয়েছে অধীত অখণ্ড কালের পক্ষপাত ধন্য আমি মহাশয় আমাকে রাঙাবে চোখ এত শক্তি রাখে না সময়
ভীষণ সুন্দর হয়েছে।
থ্যাংক ইউ আমার এই কবিতাটা খুব পছন্দ I love it because it also always it is so much about my mother's spirit and you know I think she wrote it as a it's such a it's so beautiful in so many ways and she has all the allusions to the heroines of our epics but it's also a poem about every woman and that transition that she makes in it so beautifully and also to anyone who knew her it resonates with the spirit that she had so yes it's a poem that I really love right now forever time has not the power to extinguish me don't think for a moment that I wait upon time let time keep on playing his absurd battle game every time he strips me I rise clothed without shame with the force of prayer of spells magic and divine all that was untimely will turn auspicious sublime in a just war the rebel stands forever unafraid for her ally is eternity who divinely arrayed guides her chariot destroying the enemy line thus a divisive age will be defeated and spurned though it brings on great wars it will lose every time from all our scriptures this is the truth I have learned please know that I am cherished by an undivided infinite age time will never have the power to scorch me with its rage
Beautifully done. A wonderful poem and an exquisite translation, Nandana. Could you address the choices you made as a translator?
You know, this is actually a kind of a very interesting poem to look at it from that point of view because we've already spoken about the challenge of rhyme but I also want to show you for instance you know I believe very strongly also that one should be true to the metrical structure as well so the rhythm of the poem and you probably heard it the English translation has the same rhythm as the Bangla it scans the same way as the Bangla does it also looks I mean I'm sorry I have all my marks because I always do that but so it actually you may not be able to see it but it in fact looks the same on the page too as in the way the stanzas are divided and
I'll hold up the English version.
Okay yeah right so if you hold up the English version I'll hold up the Bangla version so it in fact looks the same on the page as well and I feel with poetry it's actually very important to pay attention to the way the verse occupies space because that is the secret to the emotion of a poem is hidden in that way too it's hidden in the way it spreads itself out on a page so I wanted to keep the integrity of the structure of each poem on the page not just the rhyme not just the rhythm, but also the form as it looks on the page to be the same. But beyond that, there were other challenges, like the fact that she, you know, that she used, there were so many references. In this one, for instance, of course, there's a reference to Mahabharata, there's a reference to the epic wars, there's a Mahabharata to the ordeals that Draupadi went through, etc. And so, you know, and she was extremely, she brought her love for world literature into her poetry. So she had references to Shakespeare, she had references to the myth of Orpheus, she had references to Kafka's Metamorphosis, all of this in her poetry. So how do you, one of the, along with the promise to be true to the rhyming and rhythmic structure, to the formal elements of each poem, I also wanted to leave out footnotes altogether. I don't, when I read a poem, I don't really, I find footnotes very distracting.
Absolutely.
And so I focused on finding ways of translating in such a way that you wouldn't need, you know, you wouldn't need the footnotes. And what that meant sometimes is that you don't, it's not a literal translation, it is, you find a cultural equivalent, or you depend on the curiosity or the knowledge of your reader. So you think that they'll either know this or they're going to look it up. So for instance, she has a poem called I Give to Base a Life, Banglaয় Devotar Kal, where she quotes Antony and Cleopatra, and you know, in the Bangla version, it appears as a quote with, you know, Shakespeare and the title of the play. But in Acrobat, I just wanted to include the lines without the reference, assuming that either the reader will know it or will be curious and look it up and understand where it's from, right? Or in the case of, she has a wonderful poem called Gregor Samsar Moto Ekdin, which is about change. And you know, so all of us kind of grew up reading Kafka and Camus, and now it's a different kind of, you know, we used to, there's a Bangla phrase, Kafka Kamusart, right? Like that was sort of part of the weaning of a young Bengali intellectual, but that's not the way it is anymore. Things have changed, as they should. So I didn't know that people would know who Gregor Samsa was, right? So I chose to give the title, change the title of the poem and call it Metamorphosis, so that would be a clue to the reader about where that reference might be from, rather than adding it as a footnote. Or, you know, there's a poem called Bashi, which is a direct reference to the myth of Orpheus and Eurydice. And I translated it in such a way called Bashi, where if you knew that myth, then it would, of course, invoke it for you. But if you didn't know it, it would still play itself out as a beautiful poem about looking back, about regret, about mistiming, about the wrongness of making a choice at the wrong time, right? So I think that was the approach that I took to a lot of the cultural and historical and political references that she had, because some of her poetry was also extremely political.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes. Were there certain words or phrases that gave you particular pause?
You know, one of the things that that's another challenge, that's an excellent question, because Ma was not only masterful in rhyming, she was also an expert word maker. Hi, Megla wants to say hello. Hi, Megla. Hi, we're talking about Dimma's poetry. Okay, all right. So there was so she was brilliant at making up words. She created words all the time. And of course, that's a little bit easier in words, in languages that are derived from Sanskrit, because there is a way of creating words, joining words together, and it's a lot harder to do that in English. And so there was a whole question of what do you do with her neologisms, and there was also a question of ambiguity, because sometimes she chose deliberately words that could mean any number of things. But as a translator, you sometimes I retain the ambiguity by choosing translating it into a word, even if it wasn't exactly the word that she used, but another word that could also have multiple meanings. But sometimes you had to make a choice. So since we spoke about Ekal Chirokal, there's a word there, Kondokal.
Yes.
And she uses that as one word, right? Now, how do you translate that? You can translate that as a part of time. You can translate it as part of the time, which is very different. You can translate it as divided time, which is again different. I chose to translate it as divisive time. And I made that choice because I also feel, since you asked me about what choices I made as a translator, and not every translator would necessarily agree with me, nor should they agree with me. But personally, I feel that along with being true to the text, it is also important to respond to the reality of the time into which you are bringing the text. So for me, divisive was more true contextually to the times that we live in. And therefore, it resonated with me when I was making a choice about which word to select in the translation. I chose divisive over divided, or a fragment, or fragmented, or part, or partial, because that was true to the context into which this poem was being translated.
Okay, thank you.
And then in terms of phrases, I mean, I spoke about it a little bit earlier, I guess, in the sense that when I was talking about how I wanted to keep the integrity of the structure of a poem, which meaning the way she divided her sentences, etc. But sometimes that's really hard in English, because what takes a few words in Bangla can often take many more in Ingriji.
Yes.
And also sometimes what happens is that there's a lot that you can convey through the music of the words, through the resonant brevity of the sentence, which doesn't necessarily which doesn't necessarily correlate exactly in English. So sometimes I actually treated the translations really as adaptations rather than literal translations. So I would look at a poem and ask myself, if Ma were to write this poem in English, how would she have written it, rather than how do I translate it word for word or phrase by phrase? Let's look at what this poem is about, and the kind of rhyming and rhythm that she has employed in it, and how would we employ those to write a poem, recreate it in English. So many of her poems ended up being many of the poems in Acrobat are English adaptations rather than literal translations. And sometimes I added a few. In fact, since we're talking about Make Up Your Mind, there's a poem called Okor Acrobat Alphabet. In English, I translated it as alphabet bird, because she has this lovely phrase, Okor Paki, in the poem. But there was something, that poem is about the uncontrollability of language, and how it is impossible, and her frustration as a poet with trying to establish control over language. And so the Bangla, when I translated it literally in English, I felt the depth that it had in Bangla, I was not able to convey in English if it were translating it literally, if I were translating it literally. So I added a few lines. I added the line, I cage language. I'll read that poem to you actually, then it'll be clearer. I added a couple of lines there, and I also added the line, taking each word. And when I couldn't consult her because this was a surprise. But when after I gave her the book, I asked her, I said, Ma, I added these lines. Should I take them out because you didn't have them in the original? And she said, no, absolutely not. I think the way you have transcreated it is perfect. So sometimes there were poems that needed a different kind of an approach, a more a less literal and more inventive approach. So let me find that. I'll just read the English because I know we don't have that much time. Alphabet bird. When night falls, I search for him. I bring him home. I look him in the eye and I cage language. When day breaks, once again the world wraps around my eyes and off he flies, taking each word, that alphabet bird.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That's a very lovely explanation. And as you were talking about being inventive as opposed to being purely literal, I keep returning to the image of the acrobat on the tightrope.
Mm-hmm.
So now moving on. In her essay, Splitting the Mother Tongue, Nabaneeta writes, in Bengal, a woman's writing had better be decent and docile, the reflection of a sweet young thing. Do not let it ride the wild horse of truth. But Nabaneeta doesn't seem to heed her own advice. Certainly, her poems are not the expressions of a sweet young thing. Rather, they are often majestic and brave, even bold. Nor does she shy away from trying to mount the wild horse of truth. Is there a tension here? Because Nabaneeta would write about violence in her poems. And
very much so.
yeah.
I think with her, I don't think she wrote that kind of ironically. She didn't follow that in her in the way she wrote at all. In fact, as you correctly said, not only did she write about violence in her poetry, she was also acutely aware of the potential for violence that language had. So there is the violence in the world that she wrote about. She wrote about communal wars. She wrote about the violence against women. She wrote about the violence. She was an activist poet in many ways, and she wrote about what she saw in the world, what disturbed her in her world. But she also wrote about the destructive potential of language itself, and the fact that it can be as ferocious and as she wrote about the cruelty of language as well. So yes, I think violence, an understanding of violence, an acknowledgement of violence was very much a part of her poetry. Yes, I think she wasn't afraid to embrace the reality of violence in her poetry. I agree with that.
I was wondering, and I'm asking this because for reasons of time, would you like to read Take Back the Night?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
I would love to read that actually. I mean, there That one is
It's
actually
page 44.
that's a great example because it shows it's both about the violence in the world, but it is also about violence that lurks in language, as in it's also about the unreliability of language, the unreliability of interpretations that the unreliability of the truth that you represent, right? So take back the night. Man, in the twilight, I could still hear the lark. Woman, the night was moonless, oppressively dark. Man, in the flowering woods, a night fairy walked. Woman, in the Sundarbans, the man-eater stalked. Man, in that fragrant springtime air, woman, blood-drenched remains lay there. You know, I'm going to read, just because it's next to this, I'm going to read another one, which is called Growing Up Lesson.
Sure, please.
Which is also an interesting one to talk about in terms of translation, because it has, again, a very clear rhyming structure and a metrical scheme, which I wanted to retain without losing what it says about the violence of language. Growing Up Lesson. Boy, are you scared of bloodshed? Are you terrified of plucking virginity? If the taste of blood goes to your head, do you fear that it will be a calamity? The truth is, whether wrong or right, your blood calls out to you each night. Listen, boy, it's time for you to grow. Words can be as fierce, don't you know? The treachery that lingers on tongue tips, beyond the world that all your dreams show. Know that blood can be easily shed by lips.
Thank you. Thank you very much. My introduction to your mother's work was through her prose writings, predominantly her short stories. Among her most popular short stories are those that seem plotted around her life experiences. In these stories, the commonplace sparkles with humor. The ordinary becomes extraordinarily funny, such as when she describes rescuing a cat trapped on a window cornice of your home in Monsieur Hulor Holiday, Mr. Tomcat's Holiday.
Yeah.
Similarly, in Moddhorater Bhayankar, The Midnight Terror, teaching her to ride a moped becomes a project of the whole family, the domestic help, and even passers-by. In Dr. Debshener Bidesh Jatra, the speaker moves from one crisis to the next, beginning with losing her passport right before leaving for Europe. These autobiographical stories, together with her travel writings, blend her self-deprecating humor and moxie with an exuberant and irrepressible joy. But her poetry often expresses a very different persona, one a little less effervescent, a little more introspective. It's almost like the two selves she speaks of in the poem Make Up Your Mind. Can I ask you to comment on this duality, even multiplicity of identity, and share the poem with us?
I love that poem. Ma had a very special place for poetry, not just in her heart, but in her life. So so what I should say is that the reason why she was beloved as a writer of prose as well as poetry is that she was absolutely fearless in terms of revealing herself in both genres. She made ruthless fun of herself in her prose. As you pointed out very gently, she and they were autobiographical. They were all based on, it was narrative nonfiction. They weren't made up stories. There were things that happened to her, and the way she was able to represent them with humor and with humanity, and with self-deprecation, made her brought her very close to her readers, and that's a real gift. It's a rare gift. With her poetry, she was equally naked, if I may say, but in a very different way. She was never able to not tell the truth about her deepest emotions in her poetry. She could not hide behind humor. She could not hide behind the artifice of form in terms of the choices she made as a poet. And so, she even stopped writing poetry for a while, in a dark period in her life where she felt that she actually didn't stop writing poetry. She stopped publishing poetry. She continued writing poetry all the time. She could never live without writing poetry, but she felt that her poetry was giving her innermost thoughts away, and rather than stopping herself from being so open in her poetry, she decided that it would be better to not share it for a while. And that's actually how she started writing prose, because until she started writing Monsieur Holiday, that first batch of narrative nonfiction, which was intensely funny, she was primarily a poet. She made a choice to write prose because she felt that she could not not tell the truth of her of the turmoil she was going through emotionally in her poetry, and therefore it was time to take a break from that. But then, shortly thereafter, she went back to writing poetry and publishing poetry. But she also said that she believed truly that she had one eye which was always smiling and one eye that was always sad. And she didn't actually mean that metaphorically. She felt physically that her two eyes were oriented differently. And I think the reason why I say that is because I think they were both true. I think there was the side of her that was really rambunctious, really optimistic, that all her students and readers and everyone that she was a mentor to, her children, her extended family, everybody loved that, because that was very much a part of who she was. That huge personality, that love for life, that vivacity that she had was very much who she was. But at the same time, there was a profound understanding of loss and of the sadness of life that that was reflected in her poetry. So she was not afraid to cry in her poetry, just in the same way that she was not afraid to laugh at herself in her prose. I will read that poem since you asked me to. It is a poem that I love. Make up your mind. Make up your mind. Who do you want? That woman or me? Within me breathe two people. Make up your mind. Who do you want? That woman or me?
Thank you. In addition to her short stories, Nabaneeta Dee has written about her family in her poetry too, about you, your sister, and your grandmother. Could I ask you to read the poem Puppet about her joy at your birth.
Yes, absolutely. What?
It's page 83.
Page 83.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Okay. You know, yes, that's a poem that she wrote just after I was born. And it's part of the title, To Nandana. But I think it is about the joy of being a mother, but it was also about the anxiety of being a mother. I think she was just along to the point that we were discussing earlier. She expressed everything that she was feeling, the joys as well as the agonies in her poetry. And so she has poetry that is all about the wonder of motherhood. And she also has poetry that's about the responsibility of being a mother, that the anxiety of being able to play that role ideally was also comes through in a lot of her poetry about motherhood. So, Puppet. I can't decide. Was it a mistake? Or is it better this way? Twice now, pretending to be a goddess, I've created humans out of my desire. Funnily though, that's where the fake goddess act ends. After that, you revert to being a woman as before. Good and bad, dreams, sorrow, it's all beyond your will again. So, the puppet's dance will resume once more on a string. Practice makes perfect. Always do your best. I look into the mirror. Do I know this face? Somewhere it lies hidden, that secret divine will. Or was it just a momentary spark, the celestial celebration of an instant, an act of pity by a humorist in the background, this cloud bursting, supernatural light? You know, when you were talking about phrases, you asked me earlier about phrases and words that gave me pause. This is so interesting. I'm glad you asked me to read this poem because in the Bangla, there's a line that she quotes, which is "Aponi pathite mon koroho nibesh," right? So, which is part of a rhyme that we hear, that we learn when we grow up, right? And it's a part of a nursery rhyme. It's also a kind of it's a saying. It's a cliche, of course, and she meant to use it as that. It's one of those lessons, those aphorisms that you learn as a child that is in fact a banality, right? So how do you translate that? And so I spent some time deciding to find phrases that worked equally as aphorisms but also as cliches. That's why I had practice makes perfect and always do your best, etc. in it as a way of as kind of the cultural equivalent rather than a literal translation.
I'm sorry, that's the UPS truck. Somebody is getting in some parcel. So
no worries.
Sorry about that.
I could hear
thank you. Now, changing gears just a little, you too are a talented writer of children's books. Are you currently translating more of your mother's poetry while also working on children's books? Please tell us about her projects these days.
Well, there's so much of her poetry that I will keep working on, and this is just a sort of glimpse. And so that I think that's going to be an ongoing project. I'm very late on two children's books that I owe Penguin India, and so one of them, the one that I need to do first, is the second the second book in this Mambi series. So my first book that was published in India is a book called Mambi and the Forest Fire, which actually came out of a workshop that I did in a children's home called Sneha in Narendrapur, just out of Kolkata, which I was doing a workshop with children rescued from trafficking. And this story about a shy monkey who wants to be like everyone else and doesn't have the confidence initially to know her own power, then ends up being the one who saves everybody in the forest. That was the story, but it's a story that came out of this workshop that I did, and it was actually created by the kids in this in Narendrapur. It was an amazing experience. Anyway, that became a book called Mambi and the Forest Fire, which subsequently has been reprinted many times, and it's really a book that kids love. And it's a book that I often use to talk about equality because it's a book about a monkey that wants to fly like a crow and swim like a turtle. So I use it as a way of talking about the fact that whether we fly or swim or jump, whether we're Hindu or Muslim or Christian or Sikh, whether we are a boy or a girl, we are all the same and we deserve the same respect, etc. So that book is the one that I have. I was supposed to have written the second book in that series last year, instead of which I ended up working on Acrobat. So that's the next project that I have to do. But I'm also working on a book that I had actually started working on with Ma, called Mother Tongues. And that's about 3 generations of Bengali women writers. And it's kind of a multi-generational memoir
So is this about your family? Because there are 3 generations of women writers in your family.
Yes. Well, yes, a lot of it is actually about my Dimma, whose work you know very well, and who was a very inspiring person in our lives. So she was, as we know, she was a poet as well, and she was a child widow who remarried and reinvented herself as a very successful poet, who also wrote in 2 very different poet personas. So this book would be more about her and my mother, sort of seen through the eyes of the 3rd generation. Anyway, so Ma had been very excited about this, and we had started doing work on it. And then we didn't get very far with it, but that's another book that I want to work on. And then the 3rd book that I had been asked a while ago by my agent to write into a novel is actually based on a screenplay that I wrote, which is set in Bombay, and it's about the intersection of journalism, cinema, and politics. It's essentially about the abuse of power. That's called The Performer. So those are my 3 projects.
I see. Oh, very busy.
But since you talk about projects, I want to tell you that I'm really delighted that your summer project is translating my mother's book, Shabhumi, right? Isn't that your?
Yes.
Yes. So I'm very excited to know about that. And are there any other books that you're working on?
I'm finishing up my current translation project. I'm actually done. I'm working on the notes section right now.
Okay. And what is that? What is that about? Which book is it?
This is Bani Boshu's novel, Janmabhumi Matribhumi.
Lovely.
Like Shabhumi, it's also a diasporic novel. It was actually published after Shabhumi.
Okay.
But it's also a diasporic novel, set partly in India and partly in the US. Great.
Well, I want to show everybody that I have your wonderful translation of Shunil Gangopadhyay's Boi Upanyash Rokto.
Thank you.
Fantastic translation. So good to know that you're continuing with that great work, because we do need marvelous translators like yourself to be translating more of Bangla literature.
Aren't those the words IOU about marvelous translations?
That kind of you.
Shubrata, do we have time for another poem and the Letter to Ma, or are we running short on time? I would like to ask her to read another poem and also to read the epilogue to Acrobat, her letter, Nandana's Letter to Ma. So I hope we have a little bit of time, right?
We do. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, we do.
Thank you. So may I ask you to read one final poem, really, Return of the Dead. আমাকে তবে গ্রহণ করো কলকাতা।
খুব এটা মার খুব প্রিয় কবিতা।
The English translation is on page 124.
Great. Return of the Dead. Receive me then, Kolkata. I am your true love, your whole world. এক সেকেন্ড, হ্যাঁ, আমার মেয়ে এখানে আইপ্যাড নিয়ে বসেছে। সোনা, তোমার ঘরে। Thank you. No, not here, baby. No, I can hear it. Sorry. তোমার ঘরে। I'm sorry that you're lonely. I'm almost done. Okay, go find, go play with লেখিকা। আমাদের একটা বেড়াল আছে লেখিকা, তার নাম। Okay, can you then listen to it quietly? Can you put it on mute, please? Thank you. Yeah, I don't want to hear any noise, baby. Thank you. Sorry. Receive me then, Kolkata. I am your true love, your whole world. I'm back from the war, an aborted mother. I have brought the ocean with me instead. My lap is empty, yes, but my breasts are heavy, overflowing with wasted milk. Look at the fathomless salt water in my eyes. Come then, look at me. See how virginity burns on my brow again, fiery as the setting sun. Touch me, for my newborn flesh belongs to you now. Receive me then, Kolkata, in your waiting arms. Your loneliness is over at last. I have returned just as you had wanted me to. Why this stunned silence then, this anxious glance? This daze? Lift your face. Don't shift your eyes. Look at me. Your prayers were heard. Here I am, returned from the dead. Your childhood sweetheart, your world of passion, your old flame, your very own Nabaneeta.
Beautiful.
Thank you. It's a beautiful poem.
It is. Just as Nabaneeta Dee wrote so fondly about her mother and her daughters, your Letter to Ma is a gorgeous tribute to her. If you are not completely exhausted, which I assume you are, nevertheless, would you be willing to close our time with a reading of that?
Yes, I would love to. I realize that this one is the galley, which doesn't actually have that. So I'm going to grab this from next to Ma Saraswati and read it from here. This back. A letter to Ma. It is true I was created in you. It is also true that you were created for me. Maya Angelou. My first semester in college, you arrived in between your conferences, suitcases and admirers in tow. Refusing abundant offers of hospitality in Cambridge, you shared and immediately redecorated the 1.5 rooms assigned to my 2 roommates and me. Every morning, you stood in line in our noisy dormitory to claim your 3 minutes in the shower. You preferred the modern steel and glass shower stalls opposite our room to the quieter, more old-fashioned bathroom down the hall. You left after a week, just as I was getting used to finding your hip-length hair in my comb and turning every head in the 1,000-strong Harvard Union when you swept into dinner with me, gliding in like a queen, like you always did. A few weeks later, we hit midterm exams. I overslept the first day, found the showers occupied, and sprinted to the other bathroom in panic. As I stumbled onto freezing tiles and fiddled with the cranky knob that spurted cold water for red and boiling for blue, something miraculously familiar caught my eye. A crimson dot of velvet on the narrow gray wall. Your well-traveled bindi, carefully transported from your forehead and placed beyond reach of the spray. In a flash, I could hear your laugh and smell your scent. I could feel the tension in my neck melt into the mist surrounding me. That perfect circle of red gave evidence on the mildewed wall that you would always be there, far away, so close. Eternity, poem, j'adore, treasure, happy, forever and ever. Why did your favorite perfumes always seem to talk about you? And yet, no matter which one you wore, you always smelled wondrously the same. It's that essence of Ma, that adjective-defying, all too familiar fragrance that lingered in your sari before it was washed, that seeped out of your suitcase as soon as you opened it. The same essence greeted us every evening years ago, along with your whistle code, as Didi and I raced each other down the stairs to let you in after work. You would be awake for hours each night after we went to sleep, correcting tutorials, completing conference papers, finishing a painting, writing a poem. I never knew when you came to bed, but even in my dreams, I'd get a whiff of that Ma smell when you vigorously rubbed Nivea on our sleep-heavy faces. I could feel its embrace so strongly the night you slipped away, as I held you close. While Didi and I sang you your favorite Tagore songs, your fragrance wrapped us up in all its tenderness. You're the one who taught us to love songs and to love books. Our growing up years were filled with poetry festivals and book fairs rather than animation films and amusement parks. And while I complained about that as a child, because of you, poetry became a lifelong ally. Watching you write and rewrite every line of your work, I was captivated by the process of editing books, which turned into my first career. You and I loved every one of our literary projects together. When we were translating your poems in my college dormitory, you relished my stash of instant hot chocolate almost as much as our heated arguments over each word, late into the night. Years later, on your 75th birthday, I was thrilled to see your face light up when you unwrapped your surprise gift, a published copy of my translation of your latest book of poetry, Make Up Your Mind. Just 10 days before you died, we received the cover design of our dream project, Acrobat. You had chosen the image, a Tagore painting, with meticulous care, though the manuscript was yet to be written. With your famously dazzling smile, undiminished by illness, you exclaimed, "This is my first book to be published by a truly international press. I'm definitely going to stick around for this one." Although there were unending demands on your time, a few years ago, you had somehow managed to find several days for us to translate together my bedtime book for children, Not Yet. The book is a playful dialogue in rhyme between a mother and a child. A naughty little girl finds countless excuses not to go to bed, while her ever-patient mother is determined to put her to sleep. The literal Bengali translation of Not Yet is Ekhoni na, But you had laughed your own little girl laugh and declared, no, no, the girl must be much more emphatic. She will say, Ekkunina, Ekkunina. Well, this obstinate daughter of yours kept saying to her mother in the last few weeks, Ekkunina, Ekkunina. Could you hear me, Ma? Not too long ago, I pulled a big blue book from our Kolkata shelf, 365 bedtime stories. When I opened it, out fell a red gold rush of leaves, oaks, maples, and ferns collected in London when I was a toddler. We had gathered them together in the woods at the bottom of the hill where we lived. One night, as you were reading to me about Tinker Bell, I interrupted you with a technical question. What are fairy wings made of? Butterfly wings? Bird feathers? Or huge petals? There are all kinds of fairies, you see. You smiled. Just as there are all kinds of people. Do all fairies look like you? I persisted. I don't think so, you laughed. Fairies are very, very beautiful. But Ma, I protested, you're the most beautiful person in the world. You laughed, much more raucously than Tinker Bell would, as you drew heavy curtains over tall windows. Every little girl believes that about their mother, Tumpush. Sorry, excuse me. Well, Ma, I've grown up a bit. My world has grown up a lot. I left home as a child and made beautiful friends who became my family. In my work, I've met many beautiful faces, walked with beautiful figures. I've fallen in love with beautiful minds. You grew up too, more books published, many awards won. A few more clashes with your stubbornly loving daughters. Around your eyes, a few more lines celebrating years of full-throated life. A few more world tours, many with me, when you swept me away with your limitless appetite for discovery, your infectious sense of wonder. Remember that list we made some years ago of unvisited countries that you absolutely had to explore? Wheelchair in tow, we made it to most entries on that list: China, Egypt, South Africa, but not Myanmar. Each time we traveled, you transformed our adventures into provocative essays or best-selling books. And on every trip, we shared even more pleasures together than our plentiful arguments. Yes, we did have fights. I cried when you didn't understand. I begged you not to nag. I yelled at you when I was upset with someone else. I watched in panic as tears welled up in your ever-adolescent eyes. But I am as sure today as I was that night in London that even if you had not been my mother, even if that most precious accident of birth had by rights been the beginning of someone else's story, even if I'd met you in any of your other roles, as a poet, professor, painter, friend, or a stranger on a plane, you would still be the most beautiful person I could ever have met. At the end of Not Yet, the daughter asks, Ma, did you turn out the light? And the mother replies, yes, my dear. Now, good night. Are you on? I can't hear you. Are you on mute?
Diwali, please
I'm so
unmute.
sorry. I'm so sorry. Yes, I was on mute. I had turned it off so that I could hear you without any disturbance. Thank you, Nandana. Thank you very, very much. And at this time, I'm going to ask Shubrata.
Right.
Yes, I have been
Okay.
absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for the wonderful session for so far. With this, we would be moving on to the next segment of the program, which would be actually Q&A. And feel free to, I don't have too many questions on the queue, on the chat board, just a few, but feel free to write your questions there so that Nandana or Devali can answer them. So please, but I do see a lot of congratulatory comments, and of course, they're in order. It was a wonderful, wonderful program so far. So the first question I would like to ask Nandana for Kishore from Kathmandu is that how did it feel? Hold on, let me just, yes, a question for Nandana Sen. How difficult was it to translate the feelings of Nabaneeta's poem? Do you feel that you were able to translate the feelings of her poems?
Well, that's what every translator hopes to achieve, right? You want to be as true to the words and the images and the emotions as you can be, and that's what you strive for. Whether or not it's not really for me to say whether or not that has the emotions have been conveyed. It's for you to read and tell me.
We have many comments here, appreciations, but generally the audience, please feel free to post your questions in the chat room, or I can unmute everybody. And
why don't we do that? Actually, that's a good idea. Maybe we can try that and see, unless it becomes very loud, but maybe we
yes,
can.
Please, attendees, please unmute yourselves. I did that from here, from my side. But please unmute yourself, and if you have any questions for Nandana, please feel free. Hello, any questions for Nandana? I can read the, I can
Yes,
definitely.
that would be lovely. I'm having difficulties reading that, but if you would, that I would love to.
Yeah, at least these are appreciations of the program. Some comments from Kishore's comment, question I already presented to you and you answered. But from Rebecca Sen, loved hearing this literary discussion and joining the celebration of tremendously talented women. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca, for joining us.
From Jose, really enjoyed listening to Nandana Dev Sen and was open to a beautiful world of poems of Nabaneeta Dev Sen, a very new experience for me. Thank you, Devali and Nandana, for such an enriching experience.
Yes. Can I just join in? I'm calling from Kolkata, and it's a pleasure to listen to my dear friend Devali and you, Nandana. I'm not a literary person at all. I'm a doctor by profession, and I've joined because I was interested in listening to you and Devali, and I really enjoyed the program. And I'm definitely going to read your mom's book now, Nandana. Thank you so much for explaining so beautifully all that you read, all the poems that you read.
Thank you. I'm so touched
really,
that
really
it's
nice.
the middle. The Modhoratri,
yeah, I woke up at 4:30 and set an alarm and down to listen to it, and I really enjoyed it.
The only times in my life when I've set the alarm and woken up at 4:30 is for Mohalaya. So I'm very, very touched.
Yes,
and
Mohalaya is another beautiful experience. Me not being a Bengali, I consider myself more a Bengali, having lived in Kolkata all my life, and Mohalaya is an amazing experience, I must say.
Jamsi, I'm so touched that you joined us and so early in the morning because I know how busy you are. Yeah.
It was totally my pleasure today. Really. Thank you so much, both of you.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
It's great.
From Shubha Roy, thank you, Nandana, for sharing the letter to your mother.
Oh, thank you so much for joining us.
Dempsey, again, a lovely letter to your ma, Nandana. And Shefali Dostidar, my husband, Dr. Shabboshachi Dostidar, and I were very close to your mother, especially when she came to attend Bengali Studies Conference during the 1980s and spent time with us. It's really nice to listen to her poems. Thank you, Nandana and Devani.
Thank you.
Amitaho Bagchi, the co-organizer of these Alochana programs, and he writes, I saw it here. The program has been excellent. Well done, Nandana and Devali. Okay, that's Kishore, Rebecca, Stefali. Suchi Banerjee, such a beautiful emotional letter.
I think Shuchi Banerjee also joined us from India.
Oh, okay. Please speak up.
I'm so touched. Like I'm just really very moved that you joined us from Kolkata at this very, very late hour, or very early hour, I should say.
I actually, I'm joining from Florida, so not Kolkata, but it's a real pleasure. And thank you, Devali, for posting the link in South Asian Literary Association in Facebook. That's where I saw it. And I'm a huge fan of your mother and also your work, Nandana. And such a beautiful, touching poem, that I think, we all cried a little bit just listening to your letter. You can hear my daughter at the background.
Thank you so much.
Oh, I'm sorry, Shuchi. I was under the impression that you were in Kolkata. I'm really sorry.
No. Yeah, I mean, 6 o'clock, 6 a.m. That's some, commitment to be there. But can I ask a quick question, Nandana? So what was, Nabaneeta Dee's writing process? Like, did she wake up early in the morning or late at night, or did she do a lot of drafts?
She always, she wrote every single day. She wrote every day. And she always had a book with her. Even if she was not home, she always had her khata with her, because whenever she had a thought, she wanted to write it down to make sure that she didn't that it didn't slip away from her. She had a lot of discipline as a writer, not in the way that there was fixed hours in which she would always write, but if there was a day in which she didn't write, she actually felt really depressed about it. She felt the way she felt that all was well in the world was by writing. And so she she also wrote quite late into the night. She was quite a night owl as well. She wrote she often wrote till 3 or 4 in the morning. She started writing, she used to write, of course, by hand, like everybody did, for years. And then she started writing in Bangla in the computer. And, she lost sight in one eye, in her right eye, because of a macular hole in her retina, which made it really hard for her to write. But she continued doing it. And, as a child, as her daughter, it was very painful for both my Didi and me to see that, because you could see that she was really struggling to see, but but she still wanted to do it that way. She wrote, and she wrote her last, she had this very popular column that she wrote for in Robi Bar for Pratidin, the daily, and everybody used to wait. The whole kind of, she had a huge readership waiting for her column every Sunday, and she kept writing it till the last one she wrote was 2 weeks, about just not even quite 2 weeks before she passed away. And she wrote about Acrobat in that, about having signed the book, and how I think she even published the cover of it in it. She was so excited about it. And she was dictating it at that point. For the last few months of her life, she wasn't physically able to write, but she would dictate it, and one of us would write it down, and that's how she continued writing. So she was really devoted to the process of writing. That's the only way she felt that she could ensure normalcy in her life.
Thank you for sharing that. I mean, such a commitment, and what a personality. I mean, I didn't have the opportunity to meet with her personally, but I mean, I just feel that I know her, through her works, uh, and her Romo Rachana, I mean, that humor, and it just shows the liveliness that she had.
So
Thank
true.
you.
Yes.
From Purimal Chaudhuri, fantastic program, Nandana. You made me emotional at the end with the celebration of your mother with your own words. I have known your mothers a little bit through Shopna and Rahul Roy of Boston.
Thank you so much. I didn't know that you had met her, but I'm glad to know that. And you've met her too, haven't you, Subrata?
Yes, I did. I did at a friend's place. Actually, at the time, Shunil Gangopadhyay, Shunil,
That's
I
right.
used to
You mentioned
call him,
it.
yes,
Yeah.
was visiting us. We did a play with him. So at the time, I think Nabaneeta Di was also visiting. So she paid a visit, and one evening I met her just once. But wonderful experience. I wanted to take the time to ask you a question as well. Reminds me of my growing up years in Calcutta, reading her poetries, and some of her lines still stick in my head. One line still sticks in my head that I couldn't clearly remember. This is definitely about her feminist writing. পুরুষ তুমি অত্যন্ত প্রিয় কৃতদাস, something along that line. Very famous line at the time. So I just couldn't find it. I thought I would save it for as a question to be asked in the event.
I have to look through her poetry to find it. It may be from Lion Temerke. I'm not sure, but I know the poem. I know the one you're talking about.
This is long
Maybe
time
from
ago.
Lion Temerke, I think, might be.
This is long time ago.
No, but it's a lovely poem and a great line. So I'll find that for you, and I'll
Thank
send,
you.
let
Thank
you know. I wanted to ask Kishore, actually, what did you feel? Did you feel that the poems conveyed the emotion of the original? I mean, you don't know the original, of course.
Yeah,
But
yeah. I don't know the original because I don't understand Bangla language.
Yeah.
But the translation was good, I think.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and actually it's really difficult to translate the literature because we have to translate both words and feelings. And I think you are able to make justice on
Thank you so much. I mean, it's always I was very happy in a way that today we did read a lot of the originals in Bangla as well, because a lot of the times when in these events there's not enough time to do that. But I think also a lot of many of our friends who've joined us today are Bengali speaking, so you could hear you could actually hear both versions, which is it's special for me to be doing this in an audience where there is the translation exists in relation to the original as well. And it was great that Debali, who is a very talented translator herself and is of course extremely fluent in Bangla, was able
Yes.
to moderate this as well. That was great.
We have
I
one
also
more
sometimes write
question.
poem in Nepali language.
Wonderful. I wish I knew Nepali.
Um,
Were you going to say something, Subrata?
I was going to say that there is one more question from Devabroto Bhomik, another attendee. Devabroto, yes.
Vandana, very heartfelt thank you. I was about to write that you presented the very best side of Bengali culture, saying that a fruit does not fall farther from the tree. Now, I have to remember the lineage, your grandmother in particular, and Nabaneeta Boli, because I met her in New York long time back.
Uh-huh.
Now it seems not very long, but it was quite a long time. And she said, "You have interest in poetry? Are you writing it?" She was immediately getting into the what you do.
That sounds absolutely like her, yeah.
Very professorial way, but you represented a very, what should I say, you and Devalina presented a very intimate side, and I'm making a feast out of it because the intimacy you demonstrated and the solid work. And I was holding a question that there is something called lost in translation. Obviously, the movie, and there was nothing lost in translation.
কি হলো
As you said,
দেখো তো অ্যাম্বুলেন্স কেন এসছে অ্যাম্বুলেন্স না আমাদের মানে ভুলে এসছে দরজা তো খোলাই আগে থেকে রয়েছে
it became very much on your own, and I'm sure she's omnipresent in this writing as you wanted to.
ওইদিকে চলে সামনে দিয়ে গেছে
Thank you so much for saying that. I'm really so touched to hear you say that. I hope I think Ma was so prolific. She had over 100 books to her credit and so many awards, and she made a very conscious choice to write in Bangla, not because, as we know, she wrote perfectly well in English and used to write poetry in English as well when she lived in England, but she was very worried about the future of our regional languages and literature. So she made a political choice to write in Bangla when she went back to India with us, which was great. But what that meant was, and she was always a little bit sad about this fact, she always believed that she had made the right decision, but there was a part of her that was sad that her work had not reached a global audience because it hadn't been, not enough of her work is actually translated. Sadly, very little of, given her huge body of work, very little of it has actually been translated. And there are no other poetry books, like no collections of books other than the two that I've done. Some of her novels have been translated, not that many though, and hopefully more will be because of Debali and others. So I'm delighted to hear you say that she is present in these translations, because of course that is the mission, right? That is the goal, is to share her amazing presence as a poet, as an artist, as a woman, as a mother, as a language activist, with as wide an audience as we possibly can. So thank you for saying that.
Yeah. Here's one more comment from Lina Chaudhuri. Thank you very much, Devali, for the post on Facebook. Being an early riser, it wasn't that difficult for me to join in from Kolkata. Love the letter to Ma by Nandana. I could relate to it in a lot of ways. The smell of Ma was most touching. Thank you, Nandana, for sharing the same with us.
Thank you so much.
Debabrata Bhumik, I think he already conveyed his appreciation. Nandana, you presented the best side of Bengali culture. There is a saying, a fruit does not fall further from the tree.
Thank you. Thanks again.
Can I just say something? And this is actually a response to Kishore, the question you asked. As someone who reads both Bangla and English, I believe Nandana has done a fabulous job conveying the sentiments in the poems and sort of the actual meaning for the word translation is borne across. She has borne across very well the sentiments and feelings in another language. Yes.
Which I'm in 100% agreement, because of course I do understand Bengali and English as well. I thought that the translations were excellent.
Yes.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Both.
Thank you. Thank you.
There was a funny story that comes just to my mind. A while back, she wrote a story on her daughter passing the higher secondary or school leaving exam.
Yes, this short story Porikha. Yes.
She was describing the daughter is doing her own thing, but very well collected and balanced. The question to you is that you or your Didi?
Just my Didi.
Nandana, yeah, I think it's Pikodi, right?
Didi, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
That was interesting. Just a passing. There was so much of, I guess she was so full of life, and she touched quite a few wide-ranging experiences. She brought into her writing. So there I am. So at least the question is answered.
Yeah, it's very interesting because I heard about her from my sister. She was at Jadavpur as well, and I think she also spoke about your mother and also Antara. Antara was her classmate.
Mm.
So interesting connection. So long time, that was many years ago, but interesting that I'm connected with Nabaneeta again in some ways.
Yes.
So wish you all the luck in your project, and I'm sure you'll be a very successful writer and screenwriter, whatever you decide to be. The work habit you are showing, it will linger, and you have a tradition. It's our best wishes for you.
Thank you so much. Thank
One
you.
last comment from Neeta Shetkar. Hi, I'm Neeta Shetkar from Houston. Thanks to Nandana for the wonderful translation of works of Nabaneeta Devshen. Nabaneeta Devshen also translated Chandravati's Ramayan into English. Would you speak to what inspired her to take up that project?
What a great question. Neeta, are you there? Can you join us just at least on audio?
Yes, sure. It's wonderful to be on this program, actually. Great effort.
Well, it's
really enjoyed the talk.
Thank you so much for asking that question. Do you have the book, by the way? Do you have
I do have the book.
Okay,
I have the book.
That came out just after Ma died. That came out in January on her birthday.
Right.
January 2020. So she didn't see that, sadly, but we were very happy that she knew that it was coming out and that Urvashi Butalia was publishing it from Zuban. So, she sort of rediscovered Chandravati, because Chandravati was quite a famous poet, and she was seen as the first Bengali woman poet. But her Ramayan had been dismissed as incomplete and not as good as her other poetry. And when Ma read it, she discovered that in fact, what had happened was that it had been dismissed by male readers and male cultural historians and literary historians as incomplete because it was very distinctively feminine and in its own way feminist. So it was very much about a woman's status and a woman's aspirations and a woman's desires, also about a woman's creative expression, about and the way that Chandrabhuti brought herself into the poetry as a character and also took credit of the narration and of the authorship of it was very interesting from a feminist point of view. So she was drawn to it both she was drawn to it as a feminist text, as she was a she was a scholar as well as a poet. She was drawn to it as a poet and as someone who believed, as I discussed earlier, very strongly in the importance of poetry in the lives of women. And also she believed in the history of womanhood that you find in poetry, that you can discover through poetry. So the changing kind of cultural meaning of femininity as reflected through poetry. So she did also a lot of work on oral poetry, oral women's traditions. So this fit into that line of inquiry very well as well. And she translated it long time ago and translated it really very beautifully. She was so influenced by and she was inspired by Chandrabhuti Ramayan. She actually, there's a wonderful, when you are asking me about my projects and what else I'm translating, this is actually a book that I'm supposed to translate for Zuban. Not supposed to, that I've promised to translate for Zuban, which is also one of the projects that, one of my future projects is a novel that she wrote called Bama Budhini. I don't know if you've read that, but in that she actually brings in Chandrabhuti Ramayan she really plays with form in the novel, because part of it is written in the Padaboli format, part of it is written in verse as ballads. And so it was a very influential work in her life as a writer and as a woman poet, especially. I think she saw Chandrabhuti as a literary foremother. And that's that was one of the reasons why she translated her. Thank you. That's an excellent question.
Yeah, the book, I never expected that a local dialect like that could actually be written in current day English language and be so lyrical, still be so lyrical. That because I've read Chandrabhuti's original works.
Right.
There are references to it in other places which I've read, but
right.
I was very stunned actually by the way the English translation flowed. So
yes, it is a stunning translation. I'm curious, did you buy the book in India or in America?
In America, I bought it from Amazon.
Oh, you did? Okay, great.
Yes.
Yes. Sometimes people ask me, I mean, I'm glad that you found it easily through Amazon. It is distributed here through Chicago University Press, but I have had some friends who've had difficulties finding it, so I'm glad you got a copy.
Thank you for the response. Yeah, it was great.
Thank you.
I love Nabaneeta, these books, all of them actually. I have her Bhalobashar Baranda, the last two, the collection of the Sunday paper that you mentioned.
Yes.
So my mother would keep those clippings for me. So when I visit India, she would keep the ones that she liked for read when I would visit. So it's still a very active thing in our lives.
Yeah, that's lovely. I mean, I think she just touched so many. I think it's a different. In some ways, when you're the child, you take a lot for granted, right? So all the poetry that I've translated, which I loved it as a child too. I loved it growing up. I knew most of them Not all of them. Some of them I discovered in this last year.
Right.
But you know, it's such an extraordinary experience to rediscover it.
Right.
And now also to rediscover, I mean, to kind of understand the way, because we've of course always been, we've always been a very close family, and Ma and I we were always extremely close. We traveled the world together, we wrote together, and you know, it was a very close relationship. She was very close relationship with my sister as well. But so we took that intimacy for granted.
Right.
And I understand how real the intimacy that she had with her readers was as well.
Yes.
It was created through her writing, but it was also created through her personality, because she was so genuine, and you know, she was such an authentic. There was nothing fake about either her
Correct.
prose or her writing, as I discussed. But there
Right.
was also nothing fake about her as a person who had kind of grown up as the child of celebrities,
Right.
and was also a celebrity herself. And you know, she was surrounded by celebrity from a young age, but none of that got in the way of her being able to be absolutely authentic in every
Right.
interaction. And she actually, the relationship she had with readers meant a lot to her. She wrote about that, she spoke about that. She really felt that as a kind of central part of her identity, was also the closeness that she felt with her readers.
Right. True.
Well, I think all beautiful things must come to an end at some point. So we are reaching that point. We had about 2 hours, and we completed our 2 hours.
Yes.
And before we sign off, I have one more comment, last comment from Kishore again. Kishore writes, "It would be wonderful if the publisher would send some copies, I guess copies of Chandravati's Ramayan's translation by Nabaneeta Devshen in Kathmandu book market."
Is that the one that you are asking about, Kishore? About Chandravati?
No, it will be better if you could manage to send all the translated copies.
Yeah.
Okay.
So because the reason why I ask is that then the person to reach out to would be, I mean, we can give you, I'll send you the emails, Shubroto, of the publishers, and you can send that, you can share that.
Sure.
Yeah.
Kishore,
Okay,
you
thank
have
you.
my email. Just send an email to me so that I have yours. You have my email on the chat board.
Actually,
I will share. I'll share the information.
And then I also want to say
thank you.
I want, sorry, yeah, go ahead, Dibali.
I have posted on the chat where you can contact information for the publisher.
Right.
www.archipelagobooks.com.
Oh, thank you so much for doing that.
Thank you.
I couldn't post actually what you sent me, the cover, Nandana, because I don't know, somehow I'm not able to post that file here, but I have the web address there. But anyway, I'm sorry, I interrupted. Please continue.
No, that's great. I'm glad that you've done that. So it's very easy to remember. It's www.archipelago.org. They're a non-profit, so it's not .com, it's
yes,
.org.
archipelagobooks.org.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
That's right. archipelagobooks.org, right? তাই লিখেছো তো?
আমি actually .com লিখেছি।
That is all right.
ওটা আবার আমরা লিখি, দাঁড়াও। I think it's www.archipelagobooks.org, I think.
It is.
Yeah.
Okay, I've posted the corrected address now.
And also, Kishore, the book will be coming out in India later this year. And that's actually, it's being published by the same publisher that published Debali's translation, Juggernaut Books. So it will be available more easily in a few months. And Chandrabhuti Raman is already available, so it should be easy to get because it's published in India already by Zuban. But if you, as Subrata said, if you email him, then I can actually forward your email to these publishers, and they can make sure that their books sent to Nepal.
Yeah, please.
Thank you.
If you have to, I'd be happy to help you. One last comment from Devabrata Bhaumik. Was there any other name beyond Binaponir Biponi? Now, I'm not sure, Devabrata, what you exactly meant by was there any other name?
Did she call herself by any other name?
Oh, okay.
Is that, yeah.
Is that what
she
you
was
meant?
called, she had, that was the name that as Diwali so beautifully described, that was the name that she gave herself. But she was known by Madima. Madima used to call her Kuku, and her family called her, to a lot of my cousins, she was Minuma. So she had a, like we Bengalis, we always have so many different names.
So many, yeah.
But there was, I don't know, Devali, were there any other names that in that story she talks about giving herself? I don't think so. I think she speaks about the music of other words like Fatiha, other words like that that were very musical and she loved. But I think that was the name. That was a chosen name for herself. Yeah. I wanted to say to everybody, it's been so lovely to have this. Has been a very special and different kind of an alochana, a real alochana actually. I'm glad we all opened up and chatted, and I would love to hear from you what you think of the book. I hope you read it. My email is very easy to remember. This is a small group, so my daughter wants to make her, I need to go feed her and put her to bed. But my email is very easy to remember. It's nandunashen@gmail.com. And please let me know what you think of the book when you have a chance to read it. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Thank you, Nanduna, Devali. It was a wonderful program. I'm glad that I went forward with it because it was not on my radar screen. Somebody contacted me for that. But I'm glad I did that.
Thank you so much for organizing it, Subrata. It was wonderful.
It was wonderful.
And Devali, thank you so much for doing this, for guiding this session so brilliantly, and also for all of your all the background and the context and your own interpretations of her work that you added that enriched this discussion so much. So thank you.
Thank you again. Thank you all
for attending. Thank you very much. And thank you, Nandana and Shubhra.
All right.
So with your permission, I'll end the program now.
Yes, I am.
Thank you again. Thank you for attending, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks again.
Thank you. Great program.
Great program.
Thank you.